Hello and welcome back to Read Becca. It is time for my weekly chatty catch up on everything that I've read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading for roughly the current week. I sat down to start filming and noticed things were looking very hazy and strange, so I went to clean my camera lens on my phone and it was not improving. And so, fourth try, I finally realized I was cleaning the wrong side of my phone. The side that's facing away from me does not help us at all. So that is a great depiction of my week and my brain right now. I think that also preface, we're going to make up for last week having been a very short video, I believe, and this is probably going to be on the longer end. Make yourself a cup of tea or a cold drink. Buckle in because it's probably going to be a longer one. So let's begin with the books, and as always, if you want to skip over stuff or drop out early once I'm finished with the books, the timestamps will all be down below so you can tell where things are at. So first, let's start with a book I have on hand in print, and that is Beneath the Moon, Fairy Tales, Myths, and Divine Stories from Around the World by Yoshitani. So this is clearly a very beautiful object, just in general, really nice, attractive spine, and the little tanukis. So this kept catching my eye at the library, and I was not getting it, and so I finally grabbed it, and I'm so happy. It was perfect timing for me. As I said, this is just beautiful, absolutely stunning illustration throughout, very rich and colorful. There are something like 100 stories in here, and it is just glorious. The whole format is really fantastic. So every story has its own full page illustration, as you can see, beautiful, massively colorful, and then it has a single page summarized version of the fairy tale, and it also gives us the location and what ethnic cultural reference it's from. So I really like that. So this has, I will probably give a closer shot of what these look like a little bit, but you can tell there is just so much to this. What it maybe doesn't do well, or because of this format, it cannot engage more with the prose. So you don't get lyrical or beautiful prose in the storytelling, but you are getting a rapid fire short form of really wide ranging, a very broad breadth of types of stories from all over the world. And I loved that. So this was great timing because I needed something that I could just dip in and out of pretty much at will. So I could pick it up for a single story and just put it down, or grab 2 or 3 stories, or a little bit longer if I wanted to. And that worked out fantastic. I think this is probably not something you would just read through cover to cover. It would probably be very simple to have on hand for a child. The stories even that have maybe some more adult elements to them are simplified down. So there really isn't anything there that would be kind of questionable to read to a child, certainly. So you could give this to a child and have them read the simple prose and the simple storytelling that isn't getting into kind of some of the grittier story elements that happen in some of these folklore and fairy tales. So I think this would be fantastic to have on your shelf as a reference maybe of world folklore and fairy tales, because it is so wide ranging. So I thought this was great. I am so glad I finally picked it up. Then I don't have anything else to hold up, but I found a great alternate cover, or a much improved alternate cover of Hellbent for us, so we don't all have to look at the gruesome American cover. Though the cover does somewhat act as a good content warning, I will say, but I personally could have lived without it. But in any case, I'm also not going to re-summarize what this series is really, because I just talked about it 2 weeks ago from my reread in pretty good depth. So if you want to hear what the series is about, I will link that down below in the description box and go check that out. So Hellbent, we are very much again in an urban fantasy story, and I think that has been even more affirmed by this book because we got even more paranormally elements that are very typical of urban fantasy here. Anyway, so Alex Stern is now in her sophomore year, so it also affirmed that it seems like each book is going to follow a year in college at Yale. And Alex is dealing with some personal aspects from her backstory that have come up a little bit more prominently, and that was interesting. I think I actually liked the development there. It wasn't expected. And then the main plot of this is that open-ended aspect that was left from the last story. The first book did wrap up very satisfyingly and conclude the mystery of its book, but there was a bigger plot arc that now is the main plot of this story. And I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was fantastic. This was just barely below a 5-star for me. I think book 1 was just maybe a little above a 4-star, and this one was maybe like a 4.5 to 4.75. The main drawback of this one is, and I didn't keep perfect track of it, but the first book was so dynamic because we were jumping around through the year constantly. It was not linear at all, and the way that the timeline was layered, you were constantly having things revealed to you by jumping forward and back. And here it feels like it started out that way, but at some point in the back half, it really just became linear. And so we lost that tension in the jumping timelines and that pull to continue uncovering these layers. So I think that was the really one drawback. It's also a lot slower paced. I think we are getting much more into characterization and getting a core group. So I felt like that came together a little bit more. Alex actually is forming some connections with people, surprise, surprise, where they have to rely on each other because of everything that's going on. So I like that. I feel like Alex is opening up as a person. And before that, we didn't quite see her doing it. So I think character growth, fantastic. Setting, fantastic. We continued to get even more. There was kind of a cheesy element to the world building that it went into, like, I don't know, National Treasure almost element where we went a little too far into the artifacts being tied to real world things that, like things that are like King Arthur's table and stuff, things like that, where you're just getting a litany of these things that, oh, they're actually magical artifacts, right? Whatever. So I didn't, it was a little too cheese for me. But I thought that everything about her characterization, like she really grew, but still felt like herself. And as she continues to be kind of an anti-hero, because she isn't always doing the right thing. But I found so many parallels here to Babel by R.F. Kuang, in fact, where we do have kind of this academia setting. And we saw some of this in the first book, where with the element of we're in these secret societies that have magical powers, but they're really using these magical powers just to enable the rich and powerful to stay on top and to gain more wealth and power and status. And this book even more starts dropping in those hints in a nuanced way about the fact that academia is complicit in keeping the powerful powerful and the class division. And so I do feel like this was actually starting to really get into those commentaries without kind of beating you over the head with it. So I thought that was very interesting where it was going, and I would definitely like to see more of that in the next book, which, as far as I saw, Bardugo has confirmed she was writing it even before the Familiar, so she was working on it kind of alongside, but it would not be out till much after the Familiar, because she would be mainly picking it up then. So it's looking like late 2025, probably. So we've got a little wait for that. But if she can keep up the quality, I will be thoroughly invested to continue on, because I thought this really grew in the ways that I was looking for the story and characters to do. Really good stuff. And then, last one is a tough one to talk about. And I might actually stop the video and record it separately so that I can just cut the heck out of it if I need to. But it is going to be a rant, big time rant. I'm struggling with even giving it space on my platform because I'm so mad at this book. That book is It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolynn. And this book, as you can see from the cover, it looks like it should be very science-y and medical. And it purports to be about the epigenetic inheritance of trauma generationally. And it does talk about that quite a bit at the beginning, very beginning. And the author talks through that in a very coherent and understandable way, and I really liked that. This is the principle, it's a very emerging science about how when you go through prolonged stress or extreme trauma, it changes your epigenetic material, and you do very literally pass that down in some ways. Not as literally as he implies. I felt that he drew really direct causal relationships between things, and it just talks about things in ways that I cannot fathom any ethical, medical, scientific, or mental health professional talking about things. It just comes off really, really strange. And after the fact, I grabbed this as a totally random browse on Libby, because I have been trying to browse nonfiction and just pick up things I don't know about. So I didn't know anything about it. This has a lot of really negative reviews for the same reasons that I disliked it, and also has a lot of people calling out the fact that he is not credentialed, apparently. So I've not bothered to go check that, but it seems like a lot of people have done that and been equally outraged. What this seems to be is someone glomming onto emerging science to get in a bunch of like branded terminology for how to talk about things that have really nothing to do with it. So I DNF'd this at 55% because I was trying, because it seemed so unhinged and really off the rails. It just continually kept getting stranger and stranger. And nothing that he was actually talking about had to do in any way with the study that he talked about at the beginning. So how to even talk about this is very difficult. There are kind of two facets of what he was discussing up to the point I got to. And most of the scenarios that he's talking through are just simply about our relationships in our lives and have nothing to do with inherited trauma. Just having broken relationships in our lives and the stress that puts on us. And so there was no reason to even try to tie it to epigenetic inheritance. I completely understood a lot of the seeds that he was coming from, where he is talking about things like having an absent parent in your very young childhood. Absolutely, that is something that we can show scientifically and through research that has an effect on you. But then he went to strange places. So he drew the comparison to like in nature, animals going through that separation. It has a very real impact. But he kind of leaves that thread there for you to make assumptions and leads the reader to think about that when moving into talking about us as adults. But in nature, very, very few animals continue to have a relationship in the same way, or any relationship at all, with their parent. Like, it is very normal in nature to move away from your parent and have zero relationship there. And certainly not a parent-child relationship in the way that we think of it. And yet he implies that that trauma continues if you don't have a constant relationship with your parent. And very specifically, you absolutely must have a emotionally open and physically open relationship with your parent. So you must engage in forms of physical touch with your parent, things like that. And he talks about, very, very heavily leans on, you absolutely have to reconcile with your parents if you have a strained relationship. I can completely understand that if you have a strained relationship with a parent, or any strained relationship in your life, that is going to be a source of stress. So I'm totally in agreement that you need to resolve that. Reconciling may not always be the way to resolve that, and you may not resolve it in having a close relationship with that person, or a physical touch relationship with that person, right? Like, those may be appropriate, but they may not. You may need to set stronger boundaries in order for that to be a healthy relationship. He, in the portion that I read, exclusively talks about you needing to reconcile. You need to have one specific type of relationship with your parents, and so heavily focused on mother relationship. And never even brings up in that portion that I read, what does that mean in the case where it is an active, ongoing source of trauma, or your parent is actively abusive? He never even talked about abusive relationships at all. So maybe that came up in the back half, but it was very strange that he seemed to come from the assumption that they would be working just as hard as you would be to reconcile in every single thing he talked about, which is very rarely the case. If the relationship has become strained, it's probably because there is not good faith effort on one side. Yeah. So it was just very strange. So the other sort of umbrella of topics that he was talking about, he was trying to tie to the epigenetic inheritance element, were with things that happened in your family's past, rather than in your current relationships, but that you are experiencing trauma from. And they were complete nonsense and couldn't possibly, many of them, almost all of them, couldn't possibly take place through epigenetic inheritance. Like, no, your mom's cousin, unless something really weird relationally went on there, cannot provide you epigenetic inheritance. That's just not a thing. Yeah, I don't, yeah. Things that are techniques that are used by charlatan, psychic, and fortune tellers, where you just need to keep widening your net of people that you include in considering where these traumas might come from. Which is, no, that's not the case. For example, discussing the idea that if your grandparent was a criminal, you might need to include the trauma of the victim if a violent crime was committed against someone. Like that victim may be directly affecting you. No, that's not how epigenetics works. Again, this makes no sense. So, I mean, I can get, like, maybe where he's coming from on that. Like, yes, if your grandparent was a criminal or a violent person, that probably directly affected your parent and is how they were treated by their parent. And so they are carrying that on and probably learned bad habits and also treated you badly. Like, that's a very clear line that makes sense to relay and discuss. That is not you inheriting something from the victim of your grandparent. It's not a thing. Not a thing. Yeah, so just these very, very strange connections being made that didn't make sense. And so, yeah, this was a struggle. I really didn't like anything he had to say about how to deal with your relationships. I think there could have been so much there about setting boundaries or understanding that your parent is a flawed person that would have made a lot of sense to discuss in this. In fact, I own one self-help book, and it does cover a lot of that ground, in fact, that I feel like if he'd just tackled it from those perspectives of looking at the fact that your parent is a flawed person who has their own trauma coming into your relationship, setting your own boundaries and realizing that you are only in control of yourself and you can only control what you do on your side of the relationship and come into it with good faith, but you can't control the other side of any relationship you're in. How you frame yourself in your early life memories and ways of framing yourself differently to gain new information from your memories, really, or to look at them from a different perspective than what you had before. Like, those are all presented in the one self-help book I have. Actually, let me go get it. This is the other book, Super You, Release Your Inner Superhero by Emily V. Gordon. It is superhero themed a bit, but you will probably enjoy it if you're looking for the topics I discussed previously about creating healthy boundaries and healthy relationships, healthy understanding of your life and your past in ways that are actually scientifically researched and medically supported. This does have nothing to do with epigenetics, but neither did It Didn't Start With You. Yeah, so I highly recommend this one, and I do not at all recommend It Didn't Start With You. What kept increasingly frustrating me about It Didn't Start With You, though, is that it is actually presented in a coherent way. It is well written. It's written in a very understandable prose, and he is speaking with a voice of authority. And in that way, I feel like people that come into it in good faith and trusting are going to fall for it. He's going to predatorily attack gullible people with his absolute nonsense. And so that is why I got so mad I had to quit, because it was just frustrating to see that and know that would happen. And so It Didn't Start With You is pure chicanery, and that is about where I will leave it, really. Yeah, avoid if possible. But perfectly, that lines up into talking about my current reads, because the next audiobook I had pending to get to is Conspirituality, a book about the predatory wellness industry, specifically coming out of 2020. So very interesting and and ties in nicely, I think. The other things that I have on the go, I think the only one I'm going to hold up right now is Iraq Plus 100. I talked about already. This is a short story collection, and again, much like the folklore fairy tale collection, it's very nice to have short things to dip into right now. I think I'm not going to hold up anything else because I have BookTube prize books that I can't really talk about anyway, and I have 3 books that I am working on actively, not like right at this moment, but I am working on actively this weekend for Mid-Month Book Bash, because I am going to do a themed vlog for it, or I'm working on a themed vlog for it. And I think I'm looking at my library shelf. I think that if I finish those 3, those are all I have that are nearing where I need to return them. Everything else, I have 5 books and then my BookTube prize books, and all of those are on first renewals. So caught up on library stuff is great, especially when I have BookTube prize reading to do. Yeah, so I think that's it for book stuff. Onward to what I've been watching. I think the stuff I've been watching this week has been kind of ridiculous, maybe. We'll start with the actually like interesting one. I finished the entire series, I guess, all of the seasons of Jet Lag the Game on YouTube. It is wild. It's kind of Amazing Race-like, but each season has a different game. So hide and seek is one, tag is one, and different places in the world. And they do challenges throughout, but it's basically just 3 or 4 people. The same 3 main guys who are involved in planning it are basically always there. And then sometimes they have a guest, sometimes they do not. They do challenges. Sometimes those challenges are just sort of silly things like what you would dare someone to do. And other times they're tied more into the specific location that they're in. Like they have a card deck that they draw the challenges from for some of the games. And so it's very randomized sometimes. It's really like Amazing Race, but they've made it their own thing to some degree. And they do it all over the world. So they have had some in Europe, in Japan, in the US, and different formats every time. So it's really dynamic and interesting. And it completely sucked me in. So I have been really struggling with anything that's narrative right now, watching wise. So every time I've been starting a show, I can't even make it through an episode and just have to stop. So reality TV has been helping a lot, and reading things that are not too heavy has been helping a lot. So this was perfect for that. It was so engaging, and as I said, so dynamic. So I'm very, very thankful to my friends Shannon and Sush for having turned me on to this, because it's all available on YouTube. They do have an earlier season available elsewhere, but I loved it. I binged it in I don't even think it was 2 weeks, but it's so fun. And then other than that, kind of sandwiching that before and after I knew about that show, because I was struggling with anything narrative, I had previously seen on Prime the fact that they have channels on there. They're not shows, but some of them are shows, but channels that are actively running a show. So you are clicking on it and just going to whatever point that show is in playing. And some of them are a backlog of a single show, or the various worldwide versions of a show. So I discovered there was a classic Doctor Who one. So it's all just different seasons of classic Doctor Who. So I'm going to have to get back to that one when I'm okay with narrative stuff again. But I kept seeing those and thinking, why would anybody want this? And I am the person who wants this. It is me. So because I couldn't watch anything, it was just kind of oh, well, I guess I will just turn this on, even though it's in the middle of a show. So I have been watching the DragRace Universe channel, which is a bunch of the worldwide different drag races. I haven't seen any of the US one, but I have seen the Down Under, so Australia, New Zealand, UK, I think Brazil was one of them. I can't even remember, but different ones that are even in different languages. And so it's fun, and I could just pick it up wherever it's at and not care. And then also I discovered a BBC game shows channel. And it's not the style that I was kind of expecting initially. I was sort of hoping for the quiz shows. It looks like that's a different channel. I think I've discovered that that's out there. But this one, so far all I've watched on there is Bargain Hunt. That seems to be what's on late at night. And Bargain Hunt is kind of exactly what it sounds like. You get 2 teams of 2 people, and they are going to a flea market with a set amount of money to find 3 items, and then they immediately take those items to an auction. an antiques auction and find out how much money they can get for them. So obviously they're trying to get more money than they spent. But I've watched multiple episodes and I've still not even figured out like what the format is for, like what is the reward for winning? Are they getting the money that they didn't spend plus what they got over what they spent? Or are they getting the whole amount? I don't even know, because nobody seems to really care about that aspect other than just who won. And it is so half-assed. It's hilarious because they have an expert supposedly with them. The experts are fine, like they seem to know what they're talking about, but the experts don't really help them that much. And every single time it's hilarious to me because they're standing in the stall talking about the item and whether or not they want to buy the item. And the expert goes very like infantilizing to them, goes, so, okay, are you ready? Are you going to ask about it? And then they turn to the person who's running the stall that's been 5 feet away for the entire thing. And they sort of just don't haggle, nothing at all. They just ask them, what's your best price? And the person gives them their best price and they just go along with it almost every time. It is so dumb and it cracks me up. I don't know. It's working for me right now. So I've not been sleeping, and that has been my watching. Like I've been sleeping for a couple hours and then waking up and being awake from like 2 or 3 in the morning until about half an hour before my alarm goes off when I finally crash out. And so during that time, I've been watching a lot of Bargain Hunt. Yeah, so I just spent way too long explaining Bargain Hunt. I apologize. Hopefully everyone will skip this part. Anyway, let's move onward to my recommendations. So I have 3 great recommendations this week that sadly no one is probably still here to hear about, but my recommendations this week are Britta Bowler did a fantastic video about one of my favorite authors, Ursula Le Guin, a starter guide to Ursula Le Guin. And I'm so glad that Britta is also back from a somewhat hiatus, and so you should go check her channel out if you've not heard about her before. She's a wonderful international booktuber who reads very widely and mostly or almost entirely discusses women authors, specifically likes to highlight women authors. And the next one is a What is Modernism video that is really fantastic from someone who is pursuing a career or an expertise in academia in the area of modernism, Actual Spinster. Very much check out Actual Spinster's channel if you're at all interested in modernism. And lastly, Roz and Tilly, 2 separate channels, always do a lot of discussion together about Jane Austen topics and find interesting topics to interrogate over Jane Austen July. And coming out of Jane Austen July, Tilly herself did a really good video on pregnancy discussion in Jane Austen. And that's not really a topic I had significantly thought about very much before. And so really interesting discussion and topic from Tilly. So go check out Tilly's shelf. So those are my 3 recommendations for the week. I think I have rambled on much too long and this is going to take forever to edit. So I'm gonna let you all go, release you into the wilds of BookTube. If you have made it this far, you are truly a friend. So thank you very much for being here.